Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Brooks Rayford, CEO of the North Carolina Technology Association, or NC Tech. I want to let you know that this session is being recorded, and we ask that any questions for our presenters be submitted via the Q&A function. You should see a button at the bottom of your screen. An email will go out to everyone registered with a link to the video of this session, the slides that are used, and a link to the report that we're here to brief you on. Some years ago, NC Tech embarked on an effort to rank all the states in a variety of metrics that, taken together, show how North Carolina stacks up as a tech-friendly state. We commissioned Economic Leadership, which is a nationally known but North Carolina-based firm, to develop what has been come to known as the North Carolina State of Technology Industry Report, which is a mouthful. We call it NC STIR for short. We release that every January as part of our Outlook for Tech conference, and we'll be doing that again this coming January 28th in Charlotte. Be sure to visit nctech.org/outlook to find out how to register for that. The report has its own dedicated website as well, ncstir.com, which presently has the 2021 report highlights, but will be updated on January 28th with the 2022 results. Over the past year, we engaged Economic Leadership to undertake a new project, which would annually compare 100 or so metros across the country with a focus on tech talent demand, tech talent supply, and innovation. Tech leaders were able to give input on what metrics were the most relevant and which should be weighted more heavily than others, and so forth. The resulting Tech Innovation Index, National Metro Comparison, is what we're releasing today. The NC STIR report, this new Tech Innovation Index, and our ongoing monthly IT Job Trends report are now consolidated under the NC Tech Research umbrella. And we invite your organization to consider becoming one of the research underwriters for 2022. You can learn more about that at our website under the Resources tab. Our briefing today will be presented by Ted Abernathy, who is the managing partner of Economic Leadership. And he's joined by his colleague, Sarah Casey, who will be able to assist when we get to Q&A. So with that, Ted, take it away.
Rick, thank you very much. It's always nice to be with you guys. I'm coming to you this morning from very cold northern Minnesota, which I'm looking forward to getting back home tomorrow. I think it's supposed to be 70 in North Carolina on Saturday, and that'll be fun. Sarah's with me this morning. She's our leading researcher and actually has done all 8 of the STIR reports over the years, and was really important in trying to collect the data for this. When we look at indexes, we've all gotten used to them over the years because data analytics is sort of running our world now. We've gotten used to looking at the best states for this or that or the other, and we're all lucky in North Carolina because we're one of just a handful. There's only 4 states that show up at the top of almost every one of those multi-factor analysis. So what these things do is they look at a lot of different data. Usually the data is informed by industry, as it was this way, as Brooke said, and then you end up ranking people against each other. So for state ranking data, you see on the slide that, the top 10, North Carolina and Texas, Tennessee and Georgia are the 4 states that show up at the top of almost everyone's list. Virginia, Florida, and Utah, the next group. And then there's a few states that are in the top 10 on a couple. And this is the way we've learned to think about this. We do a manufacturing one of these type of indexes every year for several of the state manufacturing groups. We released the one for Virginia just last week. North Carolina again scores in the top 5 in this one. It's a 4th best state for manufacturing. 50 some metrics, industries helped us decide what makes it work for them. And I think what we've learned over the years is these are, they make nice things to talk about if you're in the top, and give you something to work on if you're in the bottom, but they've also become predictors. When we look at these kind of indexes and in manufacturing, the top 10 states, even though growth of manufacturing is not one of the factors that you include, end up being where manufacturing grows the most. The bottom group ends up being where manufacturing shrinks the most. So when we look at things like technology talent, we know that it's going to be a predictor of future success. Site selectors and consultants and CEOs around the country know that the availability of skilled labor is at the top of everybody's list. I don't go anywhere in the country these days without talking about workforce. And we know that it's tight. We know that everybody's competing for it. And we also know that in North Carolina, if we're going to continue to fuel our tech growth, it's going to be on the backs of skilled labor, on the backs of tech talent, as Brooks liked to say. So we're swimming upstream as a country because population has been slowing. This is population growth, and we're still growing as a country, but we're doing so at a slower and slower rate. So that's put a premium on the ability to find that kind of talent. We're slowing for a couple of good reasons. One is we just don't have as many children as we used to have. In fact, the average woman today has about half the number of children she had in the 1960s. So our fertility rate, that's the replacement rate, how many children you have to replace you when you die, is the set number is about 2.1 per woman. And we don't ever hardly reach that number, not since the 1970s. So we're slowly declining in terms of new generated labor in our country. We add immigrants, and that helps, and companies try to automate to make it better, and that helps. But this is not a problem that goes away anytime soon. When we look at the projected population change of working age, we're lucky in North Carolina because we're one of those states that are in the green here and are growing. But there's just no way to emphasize how important it is to companies to be able to find the talent they need. Every single company we work with, every state chamber, everybody is focused on, can we attract that kind of talent? What do we have what it takes? And that was 2021 in the NC STIR report. This last year, when we produced it, there are 270,000 people working in technology industries in North Carolina, over 20,000 firms. And it represents a lot of the state overall business industry. We're growing. We're actually growing faster than the U.S. We're growing faster than our colleagues in the South. And our projections suggest that we're going to continue to widen that growth. We're going to be a state where technology continues to come to our community. We're made up of 4 different types of technology. We define these every year. And part of our economy is energy tech and environmental tech, but part of the part of our tech grouping that's life science is about a third, and a little over half is in core IT, hardware, software, communication. So we know where we're strong in technology. We also know where we're growing. Over the last 5 years, big jumps in life science and environmental tech and in IT. And so we know that there's going to be more demand as we've gone along for tech talent, and there's going to be more demand in the future. The bottom line is that about a quarter of all the wages paid in North Carolina are either a direct or indirect result of our technology industry. So when you're sitting in Raleigh talking to legislators, or you're sitting at home talking to your county commissioners or your town councils, the presence of technology in the state is really strong. We expect the employment growth to continue. And when you look at the next 5 years, North Carolina is projected to be one of those top states in overall tech sector growth. Now, separate from tech sector is just technology jobs. And this helps us lead into what we're talking about today, because everybody who works in a technology job doesn't work for a tech company. So if you're a software developer for Belk's company, you're in the retail industry, but you're a tech worker. And so only about 37% of the tech occupations are actually in tech industries. And I've kidded Brooks for years that at some point, everybody will be tech, and these reports won't be particularly as useful as they used to be. So we know that we're going to look at the types of jobs people have and also at the industries. And we're expected also to be one of those states that are a top grower in occupations in technology. So even our other companies, our non-technology based manufacturing companies, our service companies, they're all getting more dense in their demand for and their use of tech workers. So here we go to the tech index. And so when NC Tech came to us, they wanted to look at a way to evaluate the metro areas in the state, because metros typically compete against metros. Everybody who's looking to make a decision on investment starts out with a funnel trying to figure out, where do I want to be? And sometimes that funnel includes state data like overall workforce or taxation, legal environment, those kind of things. But eventually they all get down to looking at a place. And so metros are usually where those comparisons take place. So we decided to develop an index that compares all of our metros with the other top 100 or so metros in the country based on population. So just a little geeky here, but we have 10 metros in North Carolina. 5 of them would be in the top 100 for population, but we added the other 5, and because we wanted to make it 110, we went to the top 105 overall population metros. So we're comparing 110 metros. 5 of the ones that are in that are in North Carolina, and they're not as big as the other ones we're looking at. And that has its own pluses and minuses, but we want to make sure you understood that. We worked on a methodology to compare those metros and look at their performance. We had a couple things we wanted to do, and we did this with the STIR report initially too. It is easy to find a report done here and there, or somebody's new rankings here and there that doesn't come out but once. Lots of think tanks do those kind of things. We needed data that we could look at every year. So we looked at tech data that was released annually, because the plan is to do this on an annualized basis so that we can monitor progress in the state, not just a snapshot of where are we today, but 5 years from now, did we move up, down, sideways? Where are the strengths? Where are the places we need to work on? We did have a group of advisors from tech leaders across the state to help us say, yeah, this is more important to us when we look at locations. This is less important. This does a better job of measuring. This does a less job. And in the end, we came up with sort of 3 sub-indexes with metrics in each one. One's to measure technology talent supply. The other is to look at tech talent demand. And the third is to look for sort of the base, which is innovation that helps drive technology in our state. So 3 sub-indexes and then 1 combined is what we'll give you the numbers on today. We tried to focus, we collect hundreds of data points, but we tried to look heavily at the availability of workforce with an equal emphasis on skills, education and training and skills of traditional way of getting that so that people would have the skills they need. And we looked closely at government posted data, but we also looked at job postings and online profile data and looked at things where tech skills could be measured. The commercial finding qualified workers, we know, has all been made worse by COVID-19. I caution everybody when we look at numbers that are based on 2020 data that the world was a little different. 2020 was a good year for technology. Lots of tech companies boomed during that period of time, but we'll have to look closely in the next couple years as the initial COVID impacts wane to make sure that the data stays stable. So just we all have lived this, so we all understand it. So the first sub-indices is around talent supply. The advisors helped us decide that that's a 45% weighting as we go forward. So we add up to 100% to get the weightings. We looked at tech workers. We looked at degrees, at education completers, profiles, number of bachelor's degree, the number of H-1B visas, those kind of things. And we always do it per capita, so that you're trying to do as close to apples as possible. So that's the first first sub-index. Second is demand. So a location quotient measures the density of an occupation in your area versus another. So lots of metros might have twice as many coders or developers as another. And you're measuring that depth. You're looking at job postings with certain skills, median job posting duration. How long does it take to fill that? The cost of living adjustment for wages, because wages still matter in technology jobs. Annualized tech openings, turnover rates, those kind of things. And that got 35%. So the tech supply and demand combined was 80% of the overall. And then the final 20% was innovation. So these are patents, higher education, R&D, business-funded education, the number of SBIR and STTR funding in the area, business dynamism, R&D. We know that is going to make it that places that have big research universities are going to get higher rankings. We understand that, but they're also the higher tech centers. So we believe that that's valid as we go forward. So those are the three sub indexes. The overall rankings, when we looked at those 110 metros, look like this. Seattle, San Jose, Austin, Boston, San Francisco, top 5. I don't think that should surprise anybody. In fact, if we did a poll of all of you before all of this started and said, list the top 10 tech places, metros in America, you'd have probably got those 5. Durham, Chapel Hill comes in 6th. Raleigh, Cary 7th. Madison, Wisconsin, Washington, D.C., and Provo, Utah round out the top 10. These are the top 30, and the report has all of them on there. Charlotte comes in at 27th, so they break the top 30, and we've all seen Charlotte's numbers, especially tech jobs, rising dramatically over the last few years. So I'd be surprised in a few years if they didn't break the top 20 going forward. But I don't think this should be a surprise to anybody as we look at it overall. But we have in the report all the rankings from 1 to 110. When you look at North Carolina's metros, Wilmington ends up as the 4th highest rated at 60, then Greensboro, Winston-Salem, Fayetteville, and the rest of North Carolina's metros. If there's 3 asterisks on there, it means that those are smaller metros. They would not typically have been they're not in the top 100 as far as size, but we measured them also. So their size in some of these cases are per 1,000, so we've taken into account for that. But the size does matter as you go forward. You can see that some of them here are punching a little above their weight. They're doing better than you would expect. Some of them are not recognized tech centers. But our goal here isn't to say that Raleigh's a 7 and Winston-Salem's a 90. It's to show over the period of time that Winston-Salem used to be a 90 and moves up to 72 someday, or looking at that depth as we go forward. So this isn't a comparison of North Carolina information as much as it is a comparison of how North Carolina's metro areas do against other places. Now we look at the sub indices. So tech talent supply, Raleigh ranked 8. It was in that top 10. You probably again know the ones that score at the top. It's not a surprise that that San Jose is the number 1 place for tech talent, or Seattle because of their major headquarters, or Boston, Madison. But Raleigh scoring in the top 10 is a good thing. If we look at some of the individual, remember there are metrics in each one. If you look at, I'll give you a few examples here. The number of tech workers per 1,000, you can see that Raleigh carries 40,000, Chapel Hill, Durham at 29 per 1,000, and on down in the state. So some of the detailed information is contained within the report, and we want to make sure that that's available to everybody. Everything's transparent. Every definition we use is defined. Every source we use is defined. Number of bachelor's degree or higher per 1,000. I think it's fascinating. Both Raleigh, Cary, and Durham, Chapel Hill, close to half now of the people who live in those metros, and that's not just the cities, that's the whole metro. Close to half now have a bachelor's degree or higher, and those are just very high numbers nationally. This is the map showing how we did on this sub-indices, and you can see the mapping across the state. Charlotte ended up 29th in this one, Wilmington 54th, and again, that's against all the big metros in the country. Second area is demand. Durham, Chapel Hill hit the top 10 on this one, ranked 9th in that 110 metro. Seattle, Austin, San Jose still at the top of the list. So we know who the industry leaders are in this, and who, if you will, we're chasing along the way. Everybody sort of out of the top 10 of Raleigh or Durham are chasing them. So we look at like unique job postings with tech skills per thousand. And Raleigh, and Durham and Charlotte, all really high numbers, a little less than the rest of the state. No surprise to anybody that those two metros are real leaders in the country in technology. But again, we want to measure how the rest of the state is moving up, and we see that movement going forward. Here's a map on this, and you can see the outcomes. Charlotte 16th on that demand. So a lot more demand, a lot of postings in Charlotte. And again, that's one of the reasons we believe their numbers will grow. And then for innovation, really amazing. Brooks mentioned Austin. Austin's number one again. Raleigh's 2, Durham's 3. And that's really high and a place we want to keep our metros, our leading tech metros in the country. When we look at things like patents per 1,000 workers, you see immediately where the tech companies and where the universities' research dollars are in North Carolina. Winston-Salem turns in third here, and no doubt Wake Forest is a big part of that, but then a place like Hickory, fourth, and a lot of that is industry related patents. So we want to track all of those sub areas. And one of the metrics is business dynamism. This is the rate of business openings versus closing, and the leader in that for North Carolina was Jacksonville, with a very high number. So everybody has strengths, and so this is not a indice of their economic strength, but really their tech talent. And so as we go forward, we'll continue to evaluate each of these metrics, but we want to try to keep some consistency in them in the years that come so that we can do those comparisons. If you look at the mix here, a lot more mix across the state. Again, some of our smaller metros doing better than you might expect on a national basis. So when we released this today, what we wanted to do is provide that initial benchmark. And the first NC STIR report was fun, and we released it in Charlotte, and everybody goes, "Oh, that's really great." And everybody then wants to know, well, how are we doing over time? Because data has sort of three things you can do with it. You can measure it against other people, and that's what we're doing here. You can measure it over time to see whether you're improving or not, and you can measure it against a set of goals. And I don't think we have technology talent goals other than to have enough for the companies that need them. But over time will be one of the more interesting things. So thanks for that, Brooks. I'll turn it back to you for questions and to see if anybody has any comments. And Sarah, hang in there if they get too technical for me. I want you to jump in and help.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the overview. For everyone's awareness, the full report, as Ted referred to, will be posted on our site today. It'll be sort of a flip book. You'll be able to move through it and drill down a bit into the detail. By the way, the NC STIR report is similar. When I mentioned it had its own website, dedicated website, ncstir.com, it does have a visual representation of the highlights, but you can download the full report. That is a very lengthy report, but you can get the full report with all the charts and graphs on that site. The index is a bit more straightforward and doesn't have a download component to it. It's just easier to read in the way that it's produced. And we'll link to that in our follow-up email. Ted, some of the things that show up in the rankings may not necessarily resonate with everybody in the same way in terms of what it really means or what is it that's being measured. And you know, from our previous conversations, one of those for me that was hard to get my head around was your chart about turnover rate. Can you explain what that means? Because I'm sure people, when they look, as I did at that particular chart, the percentages seem pretty high. It might cause some curiosity.
Now let Sarah go ahead and explain the exact data point, and then we'll talk about what it means.
Okay.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So yeah, there's turnover rate like within a company where you say we hire someone and this is the percentage that are still here after a year. But then as economists, we kind of have this industry-wide metric of a turnover rate. Maybe we should probably come up with a slightly different name. But this is when you measure separation, which is when a social security number is removed from an employee's payroll. and then you divide that by the total number of jobs. And that gives you some estimation of the rollover within an industry or an occupation. So I think Charlotte maybe had 50% turnover rate, but that's not saying half of employees leave within a year or anything. That's saying it's benchmarked against other occupations in other areas. We see it was a little high, but that 50% is a measure of separations versus total jobs through the year. So it's just saying there is a good bit of turnover, but it's not turnover rate within a company. Does that cover it, Ted?
Yes.
Yeah, and Brooks, I think this is one of the key indices that I was talking about when you look at COVID impacts next year. Last year was a year with a lot of churn in especially small technology companies where people were, I don't mean negative job hopping, but they were job hopping. Wages were going up pretty quickly. People had a lot of expansion opportunities much faster than they thought they did. And so that's one of those data points we'll look at closely next year, because I don't think this year didn't get a whole lot better, I understand, but I don't think a year or two from now that you're going to see that turnover number be quite as high. But you've seen national news about the Great Resignation and people. What we've found in our other work for other clients is people aren't quitting and sitting home. They're quitting because there are so many other opportunities out there that the average wages are jumping, and you're seeing that with inflationary wages. And so I think the turnover was partially driven by, if you look at Charlotte, just how much opportunity there was in tech companies in Charlotte. And so people could move along. So it's not a straight 50% turnover, but it does measure churn. And I think that COVID did exacerbate churn a lot last year.
One of the questions that's been submitted from our audience had to do with looking at the North Carolina metros, some of which might not have ordinarily made the top 100 in the country, but we included them. And it is, this person wrote that they think the Jacksonville business start number was interesting and wondered if that was due to the military business there, proximity to the beaches that are in the area. I'll add something to this question because we just released our monthly IT job trends report earlier this week with October data. And the metros in North Carolina that saw the highest year over year increase in tech job openings were places like Goldsboro and Jacksonville, places that clearly had a military connection, eastern North Carolina. So I just throw that in there as sort of validation of the question.
Yeah, but certainly the military has a lot to do with it. For those of you who don't go to Jacksonville very often now, 17 connects it to Wilmington in a way it never has before. So Onslow and Pender and New Hanover counties are becoming much more of a single market. And so I think some of it has to do with connectivity being better. But Jacksonville is also, that area of the state's become a little bit hotter from a business standpoint. And so I think it's a bunch of factors. But there's no doubt that when you look at Goldsboro, Fayetteville, or Jacksonville, you have to start. We did work for Fayetteville recently. 66% of the total economy of the Fayetteville metropolitan area is government, and that's all the base. So they have an outsized impact. I think that's part of it, but I do think there's also some real growth, especially around Jacksonville, with that connectivity back to Wilmington now.
Well, I will say that the next question is one that we get a lot when we publish our monthly IT job trends report, and that is most people who don't deal with this sort of data all the time do not think of Raleigh, Cary, and Durham, Chapel Hill as being separate places from a general measurement standpoint, yet they are from the federal government's point of view. So the question that's asked is from a member of the press: what's the most succinct way you can describe how the triangle, which would include both of those metros, compares to places like Austin and Boston and San Jose?
Yeah. So succinctly combined, they punch a lot bigger. For raw number data, they would certainly be much better. For percentage data, we've looked at this. They're close. If you look at percentage of bachelor's degree, or you look at, for instance, R&D per capita, Duke and UNC and NC State, and they're all very powerful. But there's no doubt that if they were combined metro, they would score very high, and on some things higher. We do combine them for some other clients on other things, and it's a fake combining, because if you look them up on all the the national reports, they're not combined. So the people who do combine them have to do a little bit of this and that and try to get them there. There are people who think San Francisco and San Jose are the same metro too. And there's a few of those running around the country. And so combined metros are something to look at. I think that there's no doubt that when you look at Raleigh and Durham together, that so many of the raw data points around federal funded R&D and numbers of people in this and that, I think it's fascinating that both of them are so high. Because I don't think people think about the fact that, if they go up there, they think, well, biotech here or something there. I mean, that marketplace is deep in several tech sectors, everything from data analytics to software to bio and environmental tech too. So it's a deep area. Combined, it would be stronger on a national scene. But to be real succinct, I haven't heard that that's going to happen anytime soon. And we'd love it. As statisticians, we'd love it. So.
And part of that is too, like Ted mentioned, if we were to combine Raleigh and Durham, then would we also have to combine Seattle and Tacoma, or San Jose and San Francisco? So part of that was just keeping the data consistent, how it's presented by the government, to keep it consistent year after year.
And Brooks, just to help a little bit further on that, about 20 years ago, when I was working for RTRP, we used to look at Austin closely all the time, because statistically, Austin's numbers and the combined Raleigh-Durham numbers were about as close as you could get, about the same population, same everything, college students. But Austin's grown faster. So I think that we would have to admit that they've accelerated at a faster rate. I don't know that the quality of the growth's any better. I think that you see a lot of high quality growth in both Raleigh and Charlotte. I think for most people around the country, they know how strong a city Charlotte is. I don't think many people realize what a tech hub it is. I think that's probably the more surprising thing to people nationally, is just how much technology is going into the Queen City.
Well, a related question has come through, which is, do you see any of the NC metros surpassing Austin, Boston, San Francisco? And if so, what time frame? So I guess I would amend that, given your answer about not merging the triangle the way we would discuss it. This is a snapshot in time. First year we've done this index, yes. And over time we'll see how things move. But you do this kind of work across the country, and just so, what's your hunch tell you about the odds of that, or is it anytime soon, even if you do think it eventually might happen?
Yeah, so I read the question, and being in lifelong North Carolinian, I think we're already better, but I'll just go that way. And we're not going to be bigger than San Francisco anytime soon. No. We're not going to be bigger than Boston anytime soon. There's a good argument that San Francisco is not going to be bigger than San Francisco anytime soon either, because they've reached that point where their quality of life is still great. Their cost of living is too high. You can't live there anymore. So you're living way out, in Sacramento or somewhere. So I think that North Carolina's ceiling is to be one of the top 10 regularly. I think we will score on data points regularly in that group. But statistically, New York City has more tech workers than all of us. So we don't count it that way. We're counting the quality of the percentages. So I don't think we catch San Francisco or Boston on any of those numbers anytime soon. Currently, Austin's accelerating faster than we are. So it's going to take some change for that to happen.
Someone has asked if the data that you have collected would allow you to know how much of the tech talent that we have is within firms that are headquartered in North Carolina versus not.
No, I don't think so. That's not collected that way. Firms don't have to declare headquarters, and we do about half our work for companies. And I think it'd be interesting to even try to figure out where headquarters are in some cases. They're not in one place anymore, and a lot of them have multiple headquarters. So I think it's really hard.
I've tried for a couple of our projects, Ted. It's pretty difficult.
Yeah, it's tough.
On a related note, one of the things that we read about in the press all the time is when a company X announces they're going to locate here or expand here by X number of employees, and there's a state grant involved, maybe as part of that for incentive. And with the advent of COVID in particular, accelerating this notion of being able to work from anywhere, what does it even mean anymore? Do you really work at a site? You probably are assigned to that site. You're linked to it in some fashion because of who you report to, maybe, or there's a budget connection. But the meaning gets a little fuzzy as we take into account people working from wherever they like.
Yeah, so just to let you know, Sarah works for a firm in North Carolina. Sarah she's in Salt Lake City this morning.
Yeah.
So data is, especially as more people are remote, it's going to get harder and harder to figure out where people are, because they can be anywhere. I mean, when you're traveling in Washington, D.C., you're actually working from Washington, D.C. that day. You live here, but you're spending your retail sales dollars in Washington that day, and our models would suggest you spend them close to your house, but you're not. So I think all of this gets a little bit harder.
And one way we tried to address that in the report was in the tech talent supply. We did look at resident workers per capita. So we are able to parse out where people live versus where their job is statistically located. So we did account for that a little bit. So we were maybe able to capture the people living in Raleigh who might work for a tech company in California. So.
Gotcha. Kind of a wrap-up question for you. I mentioned earlier, you all do this type of work for a lot of clients. You've done economic development planning for entire states. You've done metro comparisons that are different than this one, but similar in its approach. So the first question that comes to mind really will be my last question, and that is, did anything surprise you? Do the metros, even beyond the top 5 or 10, kind of line up with what you would have expected because of broader research that you do, or were there some areas where a region popped up high or sank lower than you would have anticipated?
Yeah, I think so. We do a lot of this. So we look at a lot of this data. A few years ago, a lot of people started being surprised by the Western metros that they didn't know were anything. The Provo, Utahs of the world, the Salt Lake Cities of the world, and those places are still, whether it's flight out of California or it's innovation ecosystems in their communities, they're still rising really quickly. I think if you take Madison, Wisconsin and Columbus, Ohio out of the mix, Midwestern places do really poorly, and they haven't got better. They seem to be sinking, and I think that always surprises people that they're just that some of those older innovative cities just don't score as great places for tech these days. So that surprises me a little. But there's no, as I said, when you think Boston, San Francisco, San Jose, Austin at the top of any list, we've been pretty sophisticated in North Carolina for a long time in technology. Your organization gets a lot of credit for that. We understand who we are. We understand who we're competing against. So no, those are not surprises. I think the bigger surprises are the ones that come up on the outside. I don't know that anybody would get Madison, Wisconsin as a top 10 technology city. I mean, probably we know that's where the University of Wisconsin is. We know that might be the state capital of Wisconsin, but we probably don't know anything else about Wisconsin at all. And we did a state plan for Wisconsin, so we know a lot about Wisconsin. Madison is an amazing tech town, but it's generated out of that university, and they do a great job. So those are the kind of surprises you find, are sort of these one-offs that are a little different. I said before, I think Charlotte has always been a great corporate city, and when you think Charlotte, you think finance, and have for a long time. As you know, I grew up 25 miles west of Charlotte. Charlotte's a major national tech hub now, And I don't think that most of America understands that yet. And we may not understand it as well in North Carolina, but also the rise in Wilmington, the rise in Asheville. We started this because we're seeing technology seeded all across our state. And I think that's the thing to look for as we go forward.
Sarah, do you have anything to add to that? Anything you noticed that was that jumped out at you?
Yeah, a couple of surprises, like in the Midwest, it's like in general, the Midwest is struggling, but then you might have like a Fayetteville, Arkansas in the top 20. And I think what's really interesting there is we're all very familiar with kind of like the incentives of like move here, get a tech job, go biking with the Waltons and get a mountain bike. So I think it's interesting maybe to see maybe where that might be having an effect. You hear these news stories, and then some of these areas that are recruiting and trying different strategies are showing up well in this index. That was something that popped out for me.
Yeah, and it's a good point, Sarah. Fayetteville, Arkansas, almost nobody knows that it's Fayetteville, Bentonville, Springdale. There's 5 cities there that form a little metro that is now, I think, just crossed into the right at 100. It's either 100 or 101 biggest metros in America. Most people know that it's where Walmart is headquartered, but it's also where J.B. Hunt is headquartered and Tyson's Food is headquartered. But the tech eco scene there has gotten really interesting, and so that's one of those that it shows up on these lists high, like a Provo or an Ogden or others do, that they weren't in our consciousness before, and now they need to be, because they're good competitors to us.
We actually had a coastal county join the association, our association, and explain as their reason that they had come to grips with the likelihood that they would not attract a lot of bricks and mortar types of headquarters or company expansions, but they did have a strength in attracting talented people,
Yep.
the creative class. And so they were going to focus more on that, assuming that then people would find an employer who would be fine with them living there. So I think you may see some interesting dynamics there. That a lot of this data, of course, is trailing data, as is any sort of economic data. So It'll be interesting to see a year or two from now how some of this stuff tracks.
Absolutely.
I want to let everybody know we're at the end of our time, but you'll see in the chat we've just posted a link to the report. We'll, of course, have this in the follow-up email too, but if you want to capture it now, you should be able to view it. And really appreciate Ted and Sarah making time today to help brief our group on this. We're excited about this addition to the original research that NC Tech puts together and makes available, and look forward to many more years of tracking this information and seeing how things move and whether they move. So I appreciate the time for both of you, Ted and Sarah. An email will come out later today with a link to this recording, the supporting materials, and the research tab on our website is already updated, I believe, or will be shortly, to have the full index available for you. Check out our site also for the Outlook for Tech event that kicks off our year on January 28th, nctech.org/outlook, where the annual state-by-state comparison that we referred to earlier will be released, and Ted will be briefing our audience on the outcomes of that. And then lastly, please take a look at the Underwriters option for supporting NC Tech research. This is the kind of thing that we're especially proud of because it's unique to us. It's something that's a resource to media, to policymakers, to our members, and to economic developers. With that, thank you all for joining us, and hope you have a great rest of your day.